everybody. Thanks for joining us in this month's fundraising, Intro to Fundraising and Ask Me Anything. This week is a BioTech edition. My name is Dr. Adrienne Stone. I have a PhD in translational biology and molecular medicine from Baylor College of Medicine, and I am the Houston Venture Associate for the Capital Factory. Every day I'm sourcing and advising founders in the greater Houston area. And today we're speaking with a close friend of mine, Dr. Brittany Barretto. We actually went to school together. And she is a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, podcast host, geneticist, and lots more. But before we get started, I'm also meeting with her partner, Jessica Carr from Coyote Ventures. I'll have a little bit more on their background in just a minute. But before we go any further, we've got Capital Factory's founder and CEO, Josh Baer, who is going to be joining us to share a little bit more about Capital Factory.
Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. And with our team spread across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to the people that they need to meet most: investors, customers, and talent to grow their team. We watch all of this happen so that we have this unique insight into the market and use that to invest in all the best companies through our Texas Fund. And we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2010.
So as Josh mentioned, we are very active here in the state of Texas. In fact, we wrote something called the Texas Manifesto, where we talk about how Texas is ripe for just completely overhauling the startup ecosystem. We've got the powerhouses of Houston, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and then we've also got awesome cities like El Paso, Amarillo, etc. Lots of startups coming up out of Texas, lots of people coming to Texas. And so, there's just lots coming down the pipeline here in Texas. And but anyways, that's enough about that. You guys can read more at texasstartupmanifesto.com. But next, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First up, Dr. Brittany Barretto and Jessica Carr. So Dr. Brittany Barretto is a geneticist who launched the first nationwide DNA-based dating app, Pheramor. The company was ultimately closed, but she sure did learn a lot along the way. And next, after that, she was a senior venture associate here at Capital Factory, in fact, which, as you know, we said is the most active company fund in the state of Texas. Brittany actually opened our Houston branch, and she had a blast doing it. She recruited tons of great companies and really helped us plant our flag here in the Houston ecosystem. In 2019, she discovered the industry of FemTech and learned about the grave inequalities in women's health and in the FemTech space. In March of 2020, during the COVID lockdown, she started an organization called the FemTech Podcast, and got enough international traction that she then went on to talk about vulvas full-time in her 501c3 nonprofit FemTech Focus. She's also launching a US-based seed fund called Coyote Ventures that's going to invest in stellar FemTech startups, alongside Jessica Carr, who is her co-founder and general partner in Coyote Ventures. This is, like we said, a seed stage fund that's investing in women's health and wellness. Jessica is passionate about the innovation that drives positive change in human health, equality, and our relationships with the earth. Jessica worked for 6 years designing and launching the Impossible Burger, which, if you haven't tried it yet, you definitely should. They're delicious. And she was the 12th employee there. She helped build a pilot impact-focused VC fund with conscious celebrity, and she developed product strategies as a consultant and advisor to startups internationally. She's also an angel investor, venture partner at Republic.co, and an active investor in the portfolio's FemTech fund. She can often be found swimming in the San Francisco Bay and walking her Palm Rescue. I think you and Brittany probably have that in common. You're both love to walk your puppies. And with that, I'd like to bring Dr. Barretto and Jessica up to the virtual stage. Thank you, ladies, for joining us here today.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Thanks for having us. I'm originally from Amarillo, so thank you for the shout out.
Nice. That wasn't even your bio. That was totally.
It's not in my bio. It should be.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us here today. I I'd love to hear more about Coyote Ventures, but we've also got quite a few questions about fundraising in the biotech space, and FemTech is part of biotech usually. But so I'm really excited about our conversation here today. So I guess my first question is, what is it about FemTech that stuck to you compared to the other industries in the biotech space? Because there's a lot to choose from out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you, my first inspiration to get into FemTech. And then I know Jess has her own story. And then collectively, we're just like this powerhouse team investing into women's health. But for me, when I was leading the Houston branch as a senior venture associate at Capital Factory, we have the largest medical center in the world. And so we did see a lot of biotech coming out of the med center. But I would see, maybe a cardiology valve or, something for diabetes or knee replacement. And it was, the story was that this is the newest and greatest invention for, ACL recovery or whatever. But whenever it was a women's health company, it was that, currently our competitor is women dying, like literally this is the first time anyone's ever addressed this problem. And I'd be like, what? It always blew my mind that like what they were innovating was status quo, which was like nothing. And so that's really when I got into FemTech, because I realized like this isn't about innovating for the future of women's health. This is innovating for equality in women's health. Jess, well, how about you? When did you fall in love with FemTech?
Yeah, similar. I realized just the massive impact it could have. So I considered sort of before I knew about FemTech as like an industry, I always considered my thesis being science-based, mostly consumer products and just things that have a massive positive impact. So Impossible fit that for sure. And I was seeing a lot of food tech deals. And then my journey into FemTech was I actually had like a personal thing happen, and I was doing a ton of research about it and just started seeing like, oh, there's like all this innovation happening. And like Brittany said, it's the first time a lot of these things that should have been invented hundreds of years ago are being innovated on. And when I was working at the Impact Fund last year, I started doing a lot of deals, especially in sexual wellness as well, which was what brought me into FemTech. And then I just saw the opportunity for a massive positive impact.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I know I was shocked to learn in grad school that, women weren't even used in research studies. Science, medical history has treated women like little men for a long time. And that's starting to change now. So I'm really glad that you guys are at the tip of the spear there.
Yeah. There's definitely been historical and systemic exclusion of women from clinical trials. Women weren't included in clinical trials till 1993. We've been excluded from medical textbooks. We've been excluded from just product innovation, even down to surgical tools that you use in the OR actually made ergonomically for a male's hand. And if you look at a Venn diagram of a female and a man's hand, there's actually very little overlap. So med device, like literal surgical tools that are made to use one hand, a female surgeon needs two to do it. And so, and I just really quickly, Adrienne, if you don't mind, I'd like to just define FemTech for anyone who may like be joining us and be like, fem who, what, like fintech? I thought this was about bio. So FemTech is innovation in women's health and wellness, and it addresses ailments that solely, disproportionately, or differently affect females, women, and girls. And so essentially anyone who menstruates, we're innovating for you. This includes med devices, therapeutics, diagnostics, but it also includes things like tampons, which by the way is a medical device. You have to do a clinical trial to get a tampon to the market, believe it or not. And so, it's actually a med device. So, that's what we're talking about here today.
Awesome. So very much in the realm of biotech here. So that's great. So you guys are both VCs. What are some of the trends that you've noticed from the scientific founders, not just necessarily in FemTech, but in the greater space, that are preventing them from fundraising, even though they've got great products?
Jess, you want to take this one?
Sure. I'll say a lot of times, since we both have science backgrounds, we can tend to understand it pretty well. A lot of VCs don't have that science background. So even when one science founder is talking to me and goes really deep and like all these things, and I'm like, the average VC is not going to follow. They're just going to, their mind is going to wander. They're going to be like, they might feel stupid even, and no one wants to feel stupid. So I would say, even in grad school, we had this thing of like, practice explaining this to your grandma. And I think it's the same thing with explaining the science to venture capitalists, because in the end of the day, they're thinking more about return on investment and the opportunity, and a little less about like the specific, science details that the normal science founder might think is more interesting.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'll add to that is we have a compounding factor in FemTech that not only are founders trying to describe science and biology or physics or mathematics to investors, but they're also trying to describe women's bodies and vulvas. And so, with the majority of VCs being men, they're like, incontinence, what is that? And it's like, oh, if that's the 1 in 4 women that are currently peeing their pants on a daily basis because of vaginal birth. And they're like, that's a thing, right? And so like we're literally doing, a lot of our founders find themselves literally doing sex ed for half of their pitch, right? And so that's what Jess and I are really passionate about, is launching Coyote Ventures and not requiring people to describe to us what vulva versus vagina is, and why are these things important, or how women's bodies work. And then the last thing I'll say about fundraising that's difficult, that I think is difficult for all biotech, startups and founders here, but also specifically for women's health, is that you need a good baseline of R&D. So a good baseline of research to base your like, hey, we have a ideation or a prototype or MVP based off of this science that was, well-established, research, funded, published. In women's health, there is such limited data on research. So only 4% of R&D budgets from pharmaceutical companies go to women's health specifically, 4%. And so a lot of our founders are actually raising pre-seed rounds literally to do basic science because it hasn't been done yet. So that's just like another barrier that we have.
Yeah, that's one of those hidden costs that we don't really think about with the lack of the research that's been done in women's health. From my own perspective, I've seen a lot of founders that put a lot of their if they're scientific founders, their pitch decks can look a little bit like their posters. And it's got a lot of information on it, which is, good that you've got that, but also it can be overwhelming to the average VC. So I definitely agree with like, make sure you can explain it to your grandmother. And that's a really good bit of advice, I think. So in case we have VCs that are watching us who are looking to learn more about biotech, what's one thing you hope that they would walk away from today that would help them invest in more biotech startups? Biotech is a very different investment strategy for a lot of VCs. So how do we get more people comfortable with doing that?
I have a suggestion. So my suggestion is that if you are an accredited investor and you're interested in putting money into medicine and science and biotech, I would suggest putting that money into people's hands who are experts in that field. I think it's actually a great Theranos case study. So for those who know Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes claimed that she could diagnose anything using a drop of blood, and she raised $9 billion. But she raised that money from people that didn't know about science. They just were like, whoa, this is so exciting. This is the unicorn of the year. Let's all put our money into it. Meanwhile, scientists on the side were like, that's not possible. The FDA sent them 10 letters about how it's not classified correctly. And so I think the biggest lesson from Theranos was we should have scientists in the room. And so I think at Capital Factory has actually done a great job with that. I was their first PhD. They replaced me with another PhD, right? And so Adrienne, I can imagine you, I was pulled into all the biotech ones. Is this legitimate? It sounds fun, but is it real science? And so if you are an investor interested in women's health investment, and you are not an expert in women's health, you're not an OB-GYN, you're not a vulva owner yourself, I would suggest putting that money into people who are leading that charge.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think it's all about partnerships and leveraging your strengths. And so Brittany and I have definitely identified our strengths and raising a venture fund. And, I talked to some family offices where they're like, we're just trying to not pay management fees. And I'm like, in the end, it's going to really pay off because they might have invested in Theranos, for example. So really about handing off when there's an expert that needs to be involved and compensating them properly, because otherwise they're hiring other experts anyway. And then if their strength is in marketing, that's a example of a great partnership. Brittany and I don't claim to be able to launch a D2C brand. So we're partnering with other investors who know, that brand part, for example.
Yeah, that makes total sense. There's, for anybody that's in the audience, there's groups like Coyote Ventures that are, leading the charge in providing this kind of diligence work for their investors. So, highly encourage people to be investing in that. In fact, I've talked to some early stage biotech companies who, I think another misconception that I've heard from in the investor classes, they think that that these biotech companies just need gobs and gobs of money, which eventually some of them do. But some of my early stage biotech companies have told me $50,000 would make a world of difference when they were first getting started. And that's not a crazy, early stage investment amount. So you can make a difference even without writing huge, massive checks. So I really like that advice. Okay, so what about for founders? Do you guys have any advice for, founders that are raising funds for the first time, especially in the biotech or femtech space?
Go ahead, Jess. What's your advice?
I think definitely just practicing the pitch and leveling out with the knowledge that the investor has and meeting them where they are. So, for example, I met one yesterday and she's like, you don't have a science background, right? And I said, well, I was a biochemist at Impossible Foods for 6 years. And so doing a little research, know who you're talking to, and just refining it over time, being open to being, changing a little bit depending on who you're talking to, and just practicing bringing in the confidence that, they're investing in you as well, not just the idea. They're trusting you and your ability to build a team and overcome a lot of hurdles.
Jess, I love that advice so much because I had a founder actually at Capital Factory once be like, viruses are bad. And I was like, do you know who you're talking to? I'm actually a scientist. You cannot just say viruses are bad. That is not true. So one, definitely be mindful of who you're pitching to. And if they are not a scientist, and you can kindly ask that in the beginning before assuming. I think that's another issue is we assume a lot. Do your research. And if they are a scientist, be able to dive into it. And if they're not, a doctor or scientist, being able to break it down. So when I fundraised for my DNA-based dating app, Pheramor, I didn't say we're next-gen sequencing the human leukocyte antigen genes. I said we're sequencing attraction genes, which is they code for your immune system. They don't code for attraction. That's not even, I don't even know if that's a phenotype, right? But when I was pitching, saying human leukocyte antigen was not in my best case, right? It was tell the story in bite-sized pieces, spoon feed them, right? And being attraction genes, pheromones, right? And piecing that story together. And then if someone in the audience was a geneticist and there were attraction genes, I'd be hypermutable exons. And they'd be okay, cool. She actually knows what she's talking about. And I was just going to say, build a relationship with investors. So many founders just come banging on your door saying, oh my God, we only have a month of money left and we need to fundraise and we need to close it by Friday. And it's like, whoa, we need to build a relationship first, and like, it's not, as an investor, my job to like fund you under the wire, right? Like, please, please, please reach out to me a year ahead of time, or just build your relationship, be friendly, build that network, get people to know you so that when you do fundraise, they've already feel like they've dated you, right? So they already know you.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about in terms of, we talked about not putting too much information in the deck, but are there certain things that you are looking for in the deck from these kinds of founders? Maybe generally or just specifically for the biotech femtech space.
Jess, what do you think?
I think it's fine to put things in the appendix if they feel excessive. So I think as long as like there's like the grandma level slide, and then that connects to the market as well, of like, okay, there's like the tech piece, but then there's like, this is going to be in the real world. So connect those dots, first thing. And then like, if there is an appendix where you can like go in deeper and explain some of it, I think that's a perfect way to do it, to keep like the regular deck pretty short.
Man, I'm the last one to have my dog bark in the background. I'm waiting for it it's bound to happen. It's bound to happen.
We're in the puppy club.
Yeah. So I would say I do a lot of pitch deck coaching. So I would say the most important slide is how big is the market, and it better be more than 1 billion. So the market that you're targeting, right? Mm-hmm. What is your business model? I want to see the unit economics. If you're selling a CPG, consumer product good, let's say Austin company called Funk It Wellness. They sell seeds that actually you eat to help with your PMS symptoms. On their slides, I want a slide that says, we sell a bag of seeds, Funk It Wellness, for $20. COGS equals $3. Profit margin equals whatever percent, like that's, I want to see that lined out. And if you're a medical device, or therapeutic or a diagnostic, I want to see, is there a a billing code? Thank you. Yes. Is there a billing code already created? And if not, at least acknowledging, hey, we looked it up, it doesn't create, but this is the path to get that billing code created. Standard diagnostic average would be $2,000. So we're aiming for that to be our price point as well. So I really like to see the market size, the business model, and then your ask slide. Any founder listening right now, if on your ask slide, you say seeking $2 million and you have a pie chart of what you're going to spend that money on, 50% marketing, 20% salaries. I want you to do everyone a favor right now, open it up and delete that pie chart, because investors don't actually care where you're going to spend their money. What they care about is what accomplishments you will make, what milestones you will do in order to increase the value of your company and therefore the value of my investment. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't care if all that money went to you, but if you were able to accomplish 5 amazing things that tripled your valuation, I'm happy about that. Right. And so those are my 3 big tips for your pitch deck.
Yeah, that's great. What about, so this, I guess, following up on this question, one of the questions that we deal with a lot in this on this side of the table is, what kind of traction should we be looking at for the biotech? This is a question that I think both people who are interested in investing in the space want to know, like, what should they be looking at, but also the people who want to get funded in this space want to know what should they be communicating to people. What kind of traction metrics are you looking at for these early stage companies? Because it's probably not money usually, right? Like, no. Especially if they're FDA regulated. Yeah,
definitely. Jess, you want to go first?
Go ahead. I'm more of the CPG person.
Yeah, I would say for biotech, like making sure that you have a prototype, especially I love when founders are able to pick up on their desk and say like, so here is this, what it's going to look like, even if it looks like crap, and it's an MVP, like they made it in their garage. I like to see something. If you're in Houston, Texas, you should, and you're in biotech, you should know Dr. Billy Cohen, Cohn. He has a little prototype prototype for everything. He's sold so many businesses. He has so many patents, and he makes his out of like spoons, like ladles. He like melts them in his garage and he puts them together. But that's how in the beginning, that's how he'd get funded. Now he just gets funded because he's Billy Cohen. But, you know, in the beginning, he would bring these like spoons and like fish wire and be like, okay, so the heart is like this. And we would do this med device like this. But people were able to be like, okay, all right, you know, like he could have paid thousands of dollars for some animated video that would need to be edited every week on based on what version he's on. But I think that it's really, really valuable to have a prop. When I, again, fundraised for Pheramor, I had swabs, little cheek swabs in every location of my life, like in my backpack, in my purse, in my bedroom, because I was always pitching with a swab in my hand because it allowed people to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that seems easy. And so, you know, sorry, your question was about traction.
Yeah.
Some kind of prototype.
Prototype is a good one, though.
Partnership with an academic institution. I do see sometimes femtech founders are like just everyday women. They're like, I'm going to make a wearable that tracks your menopause symptoms. And I'm like, have you ever made a wearable? Are you a menopause expert? You know? And so like, and you don't need to be, but you need to say, oh, I'm not, but my partner actually was employee 10 at Fitbit, or I don't know. Right. So, ideal partnerships, MVP, also get some doctors to say, this is important. So, I actually see some different kinds of IUDs or med devices. And I show my friend, Dr. Julie Hakim, who's a OB-GYN, I'll show it to her. Isn't this awesome? She says, they've never asked a doctor because that'll never fit in a uterus. Oh, okay. You know, so ask multiple doctors what they think of your product. Okay.
Yeah, and then not like working in isolation either, because then you're working with the doctors, or if it's an example of like Impossible Foods launching, there was like a lot of chef partnerships. So getting the right partnerships to set up for a successful launch, as well as like scaling really large, like being in the Burger King or whatever. So you can show some of those early on, especially like if it is a CPG, like show that you're talking to Whole Foods or wherever you're launching as well.
Great advice. Okay, so some questions. Let's see. I've got an audience question here. Are there exceptions for biotech startups to ask for NDAs from, I'm assuming, from the investors? And if so, how specific should an NDA be written?
An investor is never going to sign your NDA. Literally never. And so you should crumple it up and put it on fire. So the reason that investors don't sign NDAs is because we would sign 10 a day. And our job is not scouting out what cool tech do we want to steal. It's like our careers are already set in investing in them. I would say the only reason maybe asking for an NDA would be you're in deep due diligence. You're on your third or fourth meeting with an investor, and they say, I want to see the formula for, you know, your Coca-Cola beverage, right? At that point, you know, maybe there is a certain amount of like, if you know this, like, your life will change, you know, please sign this NDA. But otherwise, I mean, if a founder asks me to sign an NDA, and they have over the years, right? Even at Capital Factory, immediately I had a little sense in me that was like, oh, they're so inexperienced, you know? And like, I actually was like, I didn't even hear what the hell they were working on, but I was like, I'm not investing. If anything, I might mentor them, but I won't invest, because if they're at the level of asking for NDA, then they haven't been through the hoops before.
Yeah.
Especially if it's before a first meeting. It's like, I'm not going to infringe on your IP with a first intro call. It just really signals that they don't know what you're doing, and that other investors are going to feel the same way, and that their fundraise is not going to go very well.
Yep.
Yeah. People shouldn't be giving us the secret sauce in these early meetings anyways. Maybe deep due diligence, like you said, but if they're telling us the stuff that needs to be behind an NDA, then they're giving us way too much information. So before we go, we've got a couple more questions in the queue, but I did want to remind the audience that if you're watching and you have questions, please drop them in the chat, and we will make sure that we get them incorporated in here. All right, so we've got another question here. It says, what is biotech and how is it different from the overall healthcare industry?
So I would say biotech is the use of living systems and organisms to develop or make products. And then healthcare is like really broad, but a lot of times that is like touching the actual point of care or innovations in providing care.
Damn, dude, did you read that off? That was a really great definition. I'm glad I let you go first on that one.
I had a sense that they would ask that, so you know.
Really good.
Yeah.
I guess I am not going to further define it. I'll just give you an example of healthcare can be software. So telehealth platform or a certain EHR, electronic medical record, EMR. Apparently my acronyms are all off today, but that can be healthcare, but it's not necessarily biotech.
Yeah. And we get a mix of both at Capital Factory. We do get, the digital health platforms, but then we also get medical devices and even some therapeutics. So, there's definitely different investment philosophies and different fundraising paths for both of those groups.
I actually think that brings up an interesting point, because when you're working in innovation, our words, our language is literally not going to keep up probably with innovation, right? And so, for example, FemTech, right? Innovation in women's health and wellness. It has the word tech in it. So some people say tampons aren't involved. But it's like menstrual hygiene is a huge part of women's health and wellness. And if you need a clinical trial to get a tampon to market, there's a company in Europe I'm really excited about called Daye, D-A-Y-E, and it's CBD infused tampons. And I'm like, that sounds pretty biotech-y, And so, but some people are like, but there's no software involved. And it's like, well, okay.
Yeah, the tech part is like the slippery slope, because it's almost like trying to define innovation. So, and a lot of times the tech is the innovation. There's like other things that are considered like a new hot company that's raised a lot of money. There's not a lot of tech behind it, but sometimes the innovation is like, oh, there's a whole market that was ignored, as most women's health is. So sometimes that's the tech.
Yeah. It looks like we have another question from the audience here from Rachel Vaughn. Says, hey, Brittany, what is Coyote Ventures investment thesis, and what stage of startups do y'all invest in?
Well, thank you for asking this question. We are actually a part of Founder Institute VC Lab. It's a new accelerator for emerging fund managers, and we are in the final weeks of it. They went from like 2,000 applicants, and now we're down to like 40 funds left. So it's really exciting. And the reason I say that is the first 4 weeks of this like 15-week thing, we had to do our thesis and rewrite our thesis and rewrite our thesis. It's like your elevator pitch, right? And so our thesis is that Coyote Ventures is a $10 million seed stage venture fund investing in US-based startups that are innovating in women's health and wellness. And our unique asset is that we're partnered with FemTech Focus, which is an international media company and a FemTech founder support group. So that allows us to get amazing deal flow and FemTech, but also support our founders after we made an investment. Is that our thesis, Jess? Was that a pretty good?
How amazing we are, because we're former scientists and entrepreneurs. And so a lot of VCs come straight from banking or like straight from, no offense, but like some of them don't have a lot of experience as operators or founders. And so we definitely have like both the science perspective as well as like the operating, founding, entrepreneurship perspective.
Yeah.
So would you guys have invested in Theranos?
No, because it's not female specific. Also, we would have done our due diligence, like real
science. A trick question.
Yeah. and real quickly, let me just add, because a lot of people assume this, FemTech is not female founder specific. The majority of our founders are women because they're innovating for their own issues, right? Their own conditions that they've suffered with. But we are gender agnostic in terms of the founders, but we are very excited that naturally most of our portfolio will be female founders anyways.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of male founders that, are close to a woman in their lives that suffered from a certain condition. And this male founder would have that expertise, like Brittany said, of like developing a wearable or something like that. So a lot of times they're passionate about it because it touches their lives as well, but maybe they didn't directly suffer from it.
Yep, that seems to be. I met a gentleman who is founding an e-bike company specifically targeting women, and he came about this through seeing that his sister wasn't able to find a bike that fit her, and he was learning all about the differences for designing for women versus for men, and that they're not little men. And so it was very interesting to talk to him about his journey through that as well. So that definitely is one of the pathways that you see men getting involved in the FemTech space.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's see. I've got some more questions from the audience here. Don't have a name with this one, but it says, when it comes to pitch decks for biotech startups, what advice do you have to keep the deck short? This kind of touches on some of the stuff we talked about earlier, since most tech in this space requires scientific explanations. I think we kind of touched a little bit on this, but do you have any other key takeaways for that?
I have one idea. Brittany probably has a lot, but one thing that I've seen is you can also have supplements, like besides the appendix, you could even make a video, like a short video, just for people to like. Sometimes seeing science really helps. So that's something that I've seen like really help the understanding.
Now, would you send the appendix with the deck, or would you bring it with you to the pitch or to the meeting? What do you recommend on that?
There's usually different pitches, decks versions for when you're speaking versus writing it. So you would maybe just have it in both and only go to the appendix when they ask a question if it's live. And then when you send it, just keep the appendix there. And maybe that could link to a video if you do the video.
Agreed. And just have a slide that says appendix, right? Like have a very obvious last slide, because if you send me a deck that's 50 slides, it signals to me you don't know what you're doing. But if I see it says appendix and the next 30, okay, cool, whatever, But I guess I would just add, when in doubt, don't put a graph. Because if you're probably a scientist or understand the science well, we love graphs. Most investors are, don't assume that people know how to read graphs. Okay. So
unless it's about money.
It better look like this. It better look like the only graph allowed. And then, and also and this is going to sound like vulgar, but like no dead mice. Scientists love to put pictures of like, this mouse had cancer and died. Then we gave him this drug and now the mouse is alive. And it's like, no dead mice. Don't, no.
Or anything gross.
Yeah. Like, don't, I mean, investors are not scientists, right? They're financial people. And so like, well, for the most part, Jess and I are like starting, and Adrian are starting to change that, what a VC looks like. I think this AMA about fundraising for biotech, and it's all being 3 young women. I'm like all about it. And all of our dogs are on it too. That's amazing. Changing the face of VC. But most part, people are not scientists that are VCs. And so literally making it as rudimentary as possible, as, basic scientific as possible. And then, get a mentor. Ask Adrian, ask me, ask somebody else who's, a few years, you in the future, 3 years, and say, hey, can I pitch this to you? Tell me how to break it down. I'm too close to it. Because I can totally appreciate when it's your deck, you are so in the center of it. When it's your company, you're so in the nitty gritty. It's hard for you to even know what is the story from the outside. Would that look like? What would that look like? So you need that advice.
Yeah, I definitely find that founders tend to like they've got the like 3-inch view of their deck, and they don't realize that to the uninitiated, their story might not quite make sense. There's like logical leaps that they're making in their brain because they know everything so well. So I definitely recommend getting an outside perspective on the deck. Okay, great. We've got some more questions coming in. We've got a question from Jillian at Osaguide. Do you have any suggestions for modeling market size and future adoption or growth when working with hospitals or providers?
Jess loves financial models. Jess, you want to take this one?
Oh, I hate market sizing. It's actually pretty hard. So, I mean, I guess one way you could go about it is speaking, like if you're having trouble getting numbers online, like we said, partnerships are really helpful. So maybe speaking to a few case studies and then extrapolate from there in terms of like, okay, if you're seeing this trend and like a few local hospitals where you are able to access some of that information, and then maybe you could extrapolate what the trend could be across the US or even globally from there. But it can be really hard to do market size for sure.
Yeah, Jillian says yes.
Yeah, we actually have an issue in FemTech because, at before November of last year, there was no market size number for menopause. There was nobody. I had these founders that were coming to me. I don't know what to put. There's literally no one has calculated the market size for menopause. And so how they would do it, and this is my suggestion, like if you cannot find your market size, one of the founders I was mentoring is creating a bra that actually senses when a woman's having a hot flash and cools her off using sensors. I said, how much are you going to charge for the bra? They said $55. I don't know. And I said, and how many women are in menopause? 2 billion. Okay, $55 times 2 billion is your market size. And that's literally like when Uber, they didn't have a market size, right? Because no one had done it before. And so when you're in it, I know it's crazy, y'all, but women's health is an emerging market, and menopause has like never been innovated for before, like besides estrogen. That is what you have to do sometimes.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me a couple weeks or months ago that there was not a diagnostic code for endometriosis, right? Was it the diagnostic code or the CPT? I can't remember which one you said it was.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. There's so many people talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of research being done around it. And yet how do hospitals even like code for that or bill for it? That would be really hard to get a market size for that.
Yeah. And so what I tell founders, because sometimes I say, oh, well, do this and just, just have to times it and do it. And they're like, is that legit? And I'm like, a marketer would say no. As a VC, what I would want to know is if I said, hey, how did you get that market size? I would want you to say, well, I look through everything. There is none. That's how emerging and innovative this is. And this is how I calculated it, and just walk them through that. But if you said like, I don't know, some lady named Brittany said it was worth this much, I'd be like, so just being able to articulate how you got to that number, I think is the most important part, and that the logic is there. That is a huge market.
Yeah, we want to see it's a huge market, and then even more so than just like looking at how you got the size. And then you, in your financial model, don't just say, well, we're going to launch capturing 1% of the total market. I'm like, and how are you going to get to 1%? It's always so arbitrary to like start your financials off with like capturing a size of the market. It's like, oh, so like how many partnerships is that? Like if you're producing a physical product, like how many are you able to produce? So I think I look more critically at like their financials on how they're going to get there rather than, market sizing. I'm like, okay, that looks okay. I don't like sit there and criticize exactly the number unless it looks really off in terms of too small or too large or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being able to justify your assumptions, I think, is a big, and that we can follow your logic and agree with it. Well, sometimes we might not, but that's there can be a discussion there. Okay, so I have another question, just like completely different ballpark here. So one thing for the people in the audience may not know, a lot of funds have vice clauses or whatever they're called, where they cannot invest in certain verticals, things like alcohol, drugs, sometimes sex. I'm guessing I don't know what Coyote Ventures stance is on that. There's probably a little bit of room in there, but we can talk about that. But the question is related to what you guys think if there's room for psychedelic therapeutics in the FemTech vertical, because this is like a new emerging kind of market. So curious of your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll say we're pro sex, pro alcohol, pro drugs. We personally don't have a vice closet. We are really interested in the sexual wellness space. For us, the bigger concern is when we're fundraising. So special news alert, venture capitalists are actually fundraising too, who we fundraise from, because they're like endowments or, like retirement funds. They have clauses that we have to be mindful of. But in terms of our fund, we're very interested, and we're already, thinking about doing several sex tech deals already. Jess, do you want to tell them about the psychedelic fund that we know about?
We do know a psychedelic fund. They're called Tabula Rasa Ventures. I can put the link in. They're also a new fund in the program with us. And I've talked to the founder before. It's super awesome. I would say there's some challenges, not just with the vice clause, but also with where they're located and where they're legal. I would say that's maybe a little more of an issue than the advice clause, depending on who you're talking to, because it's legally it's tricky.
Complicated.
Yeah, very complicated. I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. But in addition to psychedelics, I had a conversation about a lot of benefits of THC and CBD on women's health. So there's a lot of cool new products there related to women's health. And so we're starting to see some of those as well. But I don't know if there were more specific questions about the psychedelics, but I haven't seen too many women's health psychedelics, but I'm sure they're out there.
I bet it's because the psychedelic research is probably still so early. They really haven't broken it up into women's health versus men's health, especially because most research is based on men. And then later we're like, oh, wait a minute, women might be different. And then we go back and redo it. So that would be really cool if they started to research it ahead of time.
I looked at one deal last year that was psychedelics. It was in Jamaica, and they have a retreat center and all this stuff. But I remember seeing it. It was like the whole leadership team were like all men, and then there's like a farmer team of like Jamaican women farmers, and they're like women empowerment. I was like, they're still working for men. So I don't know. Yeah, I was like, something's off about this to me. But.
Yeah. All I know is that the person who makes a bank that accepts everyone's money who's in drugs, alcohol, and sex industries is going to be very, very successful. Some days I'm like, maybe I should just quit my job and open a bank for like marijuana industry, or the porn industry,
like knowing your customers. It's different with each industry. So, but I will say, like, philosophically, like the reason the vice clause exists, like we're like undermining that because like pornography, I won't go too far into it because it's off the topic, but like it exists for a reason, but then we're like investing in the things that are like challenging why it exists. But so there's like a kind of like chicken and the egg there.
Yeah.
If you want more of these discussions, check out FemTech Focus podcast. We talk a lot about things.
For sure. Okay, so Rachel has another question for you guys. She wants to know how founders can get in touch with Coyote Ventures.
They can send to deals@coyote.ventures.
Awesome. So would you prefer, like, do you want them to send you pitch decks or just reach out and say hello, come join FemTech Focus's community, or what?
Joining FemTech Focus is the fastest way to get in our conversation. Yeah, we're busy with a little bit of the fund building rather than talking about founders as much right now, but we are very active in the FemTech Focus community. So I would say if you're sending a deck, send it to that email. And if you want to get to know us and our community, which is very large and passionate and collaborative, FemTech Focus is a great place. And Brittany's still doing podcast interviews too.
The deals that we're most interested in, honestly, are people who built relationships with us, right? They are I call them Fem fans that come to FemTech Focus's events, right? We have a community event every week, and we also have founder workshops every other week. We also had an annual summit. And so when I start to see the same faces show up and they are engaged and they're asking great questions and they're getting feedback on their own product, I'm like, my eye is on them, and then we have a virtual community. So if you just go to femtechfocus.org, there's a button that says join our virtual community. You can join it there, introduce yourself in the thread. We have almost 1,000 members now in there from around the world. And so the more active you are, this is how you float to the top, right? So if you're a member of Capital Factory and you want Josh Baer to be excited about your investment round, get involved, be in the chat, show up to his events, go to his office hours, right? Just show up, show your face. And next thing, people are people are just going to assume like you are the bee's knees if you're everywhere, even if you don't even have an idea. Like there's just like this perception thing. So just get involved.
That's how Brittany and I started working together.
Jess kept showing up to stuff and I was like, who is this awesome lady?
Well, that's great. Guys, those of you who are in the audience, we've got just a few more minutes. If you have any questions, now is the time. But, you know, I guess while we're waiting to see if anybody has any last minute questions here, are there any, is there anything coming out that you guys are really excited about in terms of, you know, FemTech or BioTech coming down the pipeline that people should be, you know, paying attention to?
Yeah, we're actually working on a publication right now that's going to be hopefully published within the next 2 weeks or so. So keep your eye open, subscribe to FemTech Focus newsletter. And also our social channels. You can see the announcement there. So something that I realized even while at Capital Factory, when I was thinking about starting a FemTech fund, was that there was so much data missing. How big is the market? How many FemTech companies are there? How many exits? Has there ever even been one? I don't know. Right. And so I was like, we can't start a fund until we know about the market. And so it turns out a lot of other people are very interested in this information as well. And so we've had a small army of interns over the last year doing a lot of research, and we're about to publish on the market size, which is close to $1 trillion for FemTech, worldwide women's health market. There's 102 exits in FemTech since 1990. 102 exits. So if someone says FemTech just needs an exit to be recognized, say, there's been 102, 4 have been unicorns, you know, like, and the total value is $25 billion of exits. It's insane. And then also we have a database of about 602 active FemTech startups. And so this publication is going to show you what are they working on, what kind of products are they doing. So definitely keep an eye out for that publication, I would say is the biggest one. We also have if you're in Texas and you're like, wow, FemTech's awesome, Texas is awesome. Houston Tech Rodeo is happening, and we're actually hosting a panel called FemTech in Texas, where we're interviewing FemTech founders from different Texas cities. So I can let Jess talk while I find the link for that and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. Jess, I would love to hear what you're excited about. I do want to encourage everybody to, if you're listening, register for the Houston Tech Rodeo and come check out the FemTech talk on, I think is it on Tuesday, or am I getting the days mixed up? Everything's running together for me.
I just listen to whatever my calendar tells me to do.
Same.
I don't know.
The schedule is on the Houston Tech Rodeo website, though. So, so Jess, what are you excited about?
In terms of like new FemTech areas, there's just everything is like needs more innovation. I think there's a few areas lately that have gotten a lot of attention. I think like menopause, menstruation, fertility gets a lot of attention because, you know, women are made to make babies. So if that's a problem, then that affects men. So that's like why that one's so big. So I think that Brittany in the report will show more clear graphs of this, but there's some areas that are not being very innovated on. So I think abortion was one where there's like 2 or 3 startups we know of, but we also know, I think 1 in 4 women in the US have an abortion. So I think that there's a lot more opportunities that are super taboo. Like it's already taboo enough to say that women have a vagina, you know? So I think, but even when you bring in like, you know, the, you know, moral and ethic and religion, it's even more challenging, but I think it's more reason that we need to be out there and be willing to talk about it.
So when is, I'm sorry if you said this earlier, Brittany, I missed it. Do you know when this publication is going to be coming out? I'm looking forward to reading it.
As soon as I learn to clone myself.
Yeah.
No, it's I'm hoping by in June it'll come out. That's what I'm saying, to log on to things. Mostly it's been delayed because I'm finding more data, right? That's what we're doing. We have these interns that are like, oops, there's actually another exit or this. And so we just, you know, I want us to make it an annual report. I think that's also our secret sauce at Coyote Ventures is like, why shouldn't I just do FemTech investing? Why should I give it to you? And it's like, because we have these databases and this research, and we do an annual report that people reference around the world. Oh yeah, you're right. I should. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And so I honestly, Adrienne, I know, and Jess can appreciate this as well as scientists, is like making these graphs and like doing the equal sum or equals median and like scrolling and then like pressing enter and like seeing the number of the total value, or like the average exit value is 300 million. And it's just like, so exciting to like see numbers that in that moment, no one in the world knows but you, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. It sounds like, okay, so let's see, your talk is on Friday, the 21st?
Friday the 21st, 11 to 12 CT, Central.
Central time. Yeah. We are in Houston, everybody, so we're on Central time. Great. So I hope everybody will tune in for that. Also, on Friday, in the afternoon, I think it's at 2, don't quote me on that, we will be having the finals for the Houston 50K Investment Challenge. So we've got a couple of biotech companies that are actually going to be pitching at that. And so I look forward to seeing everybody there. But it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I really appreciate you ladies making time for us today. This was a great chat. And if are there any last minute like links or anything you wanted to drop? FemTechFocus.org is that the best way to get in touch with your community?
That is. And then also you can go to Coyote.Ventures and put your email in there for when we start to launch that newsletter.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, this was a great chat. Looks like you've already got a new subscriber, so that's good to see. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week at the Tech Rodeo.
Yes, Adrienne, thank you so much. And thank you, Capital Factory, for always keeping us in mind. You know, I was so excited to get the job at Capital Factory. It taught me pretty much everything I knew on the venture side of things. You know, I had always seen everything through the founder's eyes. And so I'm very, very grateful for Capital Factory. And what I can say is now being a VC fundraising myself, saying, you know, I got my experience at Capital Factory. Do know that people around the world know Capital Factory. You know, I meet people every day that I did not think they would know who Capital Factory was. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love what they do. And I'm like, I worked for them. Yeah. And so if you are part of Capital Factory, you're in the right place. And thanks for giving us the time.
Thanks for the shout out.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you, Adrienne.
And you, Jessica.
Yeah, I talk to Brittany all the time. Good to see you.
See you later.
All right. Well, thanks, ladies. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This has been Intro to Fundraising and AMA Biotech Edition, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.